Okay, we are on Unit 5, which is Encounters and Exchanges. So we need to talk about reasons for European exploration. And basically, guys, it breaks down to money. They think they're going to make a bunch of money. They do. And that's what really spurs their quest for exploration. The main thing that leads to, initially, to their demand and their need for exploration are things called spices. There's no refrigeration for meat at this time. Remember, I mentioned that before. If you want meat, it's like really heavily salted. That's one way of keeping it. Or it would get they didn't salt it quick enough, so this tastes kind of funky. So as a result, they would use a lot of spices to try to mask the meat that it was kind of turning. So spices were very valuable. They were in demand constantly throughout Europe. So people could make a lot of money when they went out for spices. There are no spices in Europe, so they have to get them from one place, bring them back to Europe. And they're only found in Asian countries. So initially, they get all their spices by the Silk Road, as we mentioned earlier. People don't want to use the Silk Road because it's expensive. So they're thinking, how can we get stuff here cheaper? Or if you're a merchant, you're like, how can I get spices here without a bunch of people sticking their hand out and say, please pay up at every stop along the Silk Road? They want to cut out the middlemen. So they start looking at sea routes for trading. They want to find a more efficient way to get spices from Asia to the Middle Eastern market, to the European market, and to the Mediterranean markets. So spices was the first thing that really spurred this explosion in exploration. The next one is gold. Surprise, gold is a very valuable commodity. The material itself, and if you get rich, you can buy more gold, just adds to this gold frenzy. Gold equals wealth and power. You need to remember that. It was true then, it's true now. Larger empires were a goal of the European countries. And if you claim as much land as you could, that means you're powerful. If you take all the natural resources you can out of those lands, that means you're going to get rich. And if you use the people that live in those places that you discover as a cheap source of labor, or if you enslave those people, you're going to get really wealthy too as a result of that. So the way Europe looks at it, larger empire equals more power. They also want to spread Christianity. And Christianity spreading, you have to remember in the late 1400s when this exploration era first starts, it's before the Protestant Reformation. So Europe is mono-religion. It only has one religion, and that's the Roman Catholic faith. So they want to spread their Christianity, their belief system, throughout all these different areas of exploration that occur. They want to convert as many people as they can to Christianity. Okay, that way they get the blessing of the Pope, and that just helps things move along. Now, the impact of expansion and colonization is interesting. It's more complex than what we're often taught in terms of, they go there to plunder, to take as many things as possible, and to destroy as many people as they can come across. That did happen, but there were a lot of other things going on at the same time too. Kind of a good framework to use when you look at these different cultures coming into contact, the European culture coming into contact with other native cultures, is that both of these cultures have completely different perceptions or ideas about what is valuable and what isn't. And what the whole concept of ownership is different, Europe compared to the native cultures too. So basically you have two cultures that are coming in and just clashing with each other. And whoever has the best technology is going to come out the winner. And spoiler alert, that's Europe. Mercantilism is an economic system that is put into place that benefits the mother country or the colonizer to a great degree. It's used by Spain, it's used by England, to a lesser degree, it's used by France, but it is used. And the colonies serve to enrich the home country. That's their sole purpose. The colonies ship raw goods, lumber, other things to the mother country. The mother country will produce manufactured goods like furniture or ships themselves. They'll ship them back to the colonies. The colonies will buy them, send more raw materials to the mother country. So it's kind of a loop that keeps going around and around. And it definitely benefits the mother country or the colonizer, because the mother country says, by the way, you can't trade with anybody else but us. So it's just like a big cash machine for the mother country. The wealth from the colonies finance an explosion and a change in lifestyle in Europe. Europe becomes more powerful and reaches a stage where Europe has this period of time where it dominates the world. And a lot of that is a result of mercantilism and technological advantages. And that, like I said, that benefits Europe tremendously. The European standard of living rises as a result of all this wealth coming into Europe, especially for the upper class. Always it rises. There's an increased life expectancy, and the diet of just Europeans changes as a result of new food stuff coming to Europe from the Americas. Thing to remember about this cultural exchange between the old world, which is Europe, and the new world, which is the Americas, is that the colonization undermines the culture of the new world. They don't stand a chance against the Europeans. And these are cultures that had existed for hundreds of years before the Europeans showed up. And the Europeans just sweep them away. Okay? They're just swept away like they don't even mean anything. And as a result of their belief systems being swept away, these native societies are made very unstable, and they're insecure. They're prone to invasions, prone to diseases, and so forth. I spoke about different things that like kind of revolutionized life in Europe. I think probably one of the best examples of that is tobacco. It had a huge effect on Europe. It was considered pleasurable. It was considered a leisure activity. And we're talking about an agricultural good that isn't even eaten. It's just smoked or sniffed or whatever else they did with tobacco back then. Other things are dietary concerns, like corn becomes a staple, not only for people, but for livestock. Potatoes come in and radically change the diet of countries. Tea and coffee, these beverages become important to Europe and the economy of Europe. Chocolate, of course, something we still treasure in this country today. And tomatoes. Tomatoes are interesting because originally they were thought to be poisonous, and they kind of had to do a hard sell on them to get people to use them, but they did use them. So the arrogance of Europeans toward native peoples is pretty amazing. Europe thought they were superior to, and everyone that came across Europeans were inferior. So this arrogance totally misses the spot in terms of the dignity and the serenity of the native peoples, because instead of seeing that and looking at it through that lens, the Europeans only see poverty, dirt, and ignorance, and superstition. So they initially have an attitude of, we're so much better than these people, you know? They're pathetic. Eventually, European horizons are expanded, and they start appreciating more of what these civilizations have to offer in their history and their heritage, but that takes a long time. And to this day, it's not really given its full due, to be truthful. The Columbian Exchange, we talked about that. That's where you have goods taken from the the New World, the Americas, and sent to Europe, and the exchange of goods that went back and forth. Unfortunately, I'd say with regard to the Columbian Exchange, the old world definitely got the better of it. And one of the things that was exchanged from Europe to the Americas was disease, and that just devastates the population, as we talked about. Another negative thing to mention when we talk about encounters and exchanges is the triangular trade. And there's a couple examples of this. Probably the one we're most familiar with is the Atlantic slave trade. And you don't ever want your ships traveling across the ocean with empty hulls. So they're figuring we always got to be moving some kind of good, and the end result's always got to be profit for the mother country in the mercantilist system. So slaves from Africa were sent to the Caribbean. Sugar from the Caribbean was sent to New England, another region. Two more regions you need to be aware of, the Caribbean and New England. And then from New England, rum and manufactured goods were sent to Africa. So we have a perfect triangle that is just, again, the analogy is of a money-making machine. Another triangular trade I want to mention is between Europe, America, and again, Africa. And this, the way this one goes is that sugar, tobacco, cotton goes from America to Europe. And then from textiles, rum, and manufactured goods go from Europe to Africa. And then slaves from Africa go to the Americas, okay? There's still an intense labor shortage. They look for a solution to that problem by using enslaved people from Africa. And we've talked about this before. Well, why didn't they use native people? Because native people were dying. Like over 90-95% of the native population dies. The Africans don't die because the African population had been in contact with Europeans for hundreds of years. They had developed resistance to the diseases that were prevalent in Europe at this time, even the common things like cold and flu. The Africans had a resistance to this, and they were able to survive that. Finally, the last thing I want to mention is the role of disease in the conquest of new lands. I've mentioned this in terms of the Americas, and disease plays a tremendous impact on history. It alters the existing cultures, and I think we covered that pretty well. So this is the end of the review. I've crammed a whole semester into these. They're going to be broken up into each standard, or unit, I should say, not standard, but unit. So you don't have to sit there and like watch however many minutes it ended up to be. Take them one at a time, but do take them and check them out and put some notes on your flip cards or plug in some spots in your study guides. Thanks. There'll be another session, I should say, where I'm going to answer your questions that you give me. And of course, there'll be shout outs with that. And then later on, once we've even had our final, I'm going to do another show where I'm going to dedicate the show to all the questions that Angel has bombarded me with this semester. All right. Thanks.